In 1986, the Soccer World Cup was held in Mexico. I'm sure you, like I, spent the summer in front of the television. No, of course you didn't, because sadly the United States didn't qualify. The tournament is best remembered for bringing to a world audience that communal activity beloved of stadium crowds, the Mexican wave. The phenomenon is said to have begun at a Californian baseball game in the early 80s. So you could say it's another product that America outsourced south of the border. In the US, it's just called the wave, because calling it a Mexican wave might affect the balance of trade figures. I want you to imagine the Old Testament as a Mexican wave, and that each new development in the story is like that wave reaching a new part of the crowd, with its own cheer. The way the first half of the Old Testament is written, it's all leading somewhere. The cheer gets louder and louder until it reaches a climax. It starts with the story of God in Genesis 1 saying, "Let there be light." Let's call this part number 1. This is a story about the sheer power of God's word to bring something out of nothing. God just says the word and says, "Let it be," and it is good. Then there is the story of Adam and Eve. We'll call this number 2. This is a story about how God longs for us to be his friends, and how he makes everything possible for us to keep that friendship. But it's also a story about how first the woman and then the man disobey God. The next major part of the story, which I'll call number 3, is the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, sometimes known as the patriarchs. God calls Abraham and says he will have as many descendants as the stars in the sky, and they will be a blessing to all peoples. And God changes Jacob's name to Israel and renews the covenant with him, even though Jacob, frankly, isn't much of a role model. And then the next part, which we'll call number 4, is Moses, when God intervenes in history to set his people free and gives them the law to make them holy, set apart for him. Moses is the key intermediary between God and his people, the one who gives the law to Israel. And the law, written on 2 stone tablets and kept in a container known as the Ark of the Covenant, which itself was kept for a long time in a tent, that law was considered the embodiment of God's presence among his people and his commitment to them. And number 5, which we could call the climax of the Mexican wave, where the cheering gets loudest and the waving becomes most frenzied, is David. In David, all the vital pieces seem to be in place. Israel has the promised land and is safe within its borders. It has a capital city, Jerusalem, conquered by David. It has a king, and a king to be proud of. It certainly appears to have God's favor. And this seems to be the right time to crown that favor by building a temple, a true place for the glory of God to dwell among his people. Nathan the prophet and David the king have a debate about this, and the conclusion seems to be that the house that God is establishing is not a physical one, but a fleshly one. Not one built out of cedar wood, but one that follows David's descendants. No longer does God say, "If you keep my covenant, I will be your God." There are no longer any ifs in this relationship. "Your throne shall be established forever," says God. No small print. No get-out clauses. You know what they say about the traditional breakfast of bacon and eggs. The chicken, giving the egg, is involved, but the pig, giving the bacon, is committed. Well, here God moves from being a chicken to being a pig. God is committed to Israel. No ifs or buts. That's what makes today's Old Testament passage so important. It really is the high watermark of the whole story. And then it all falls apart. After David's son Solomon dies, the kingdom splits, foreign powers invade, and Israel goes into exile, losing land, city, king, temple, and most of all, favor. Catastrophe. If you remember the movie The Blues Brothers, you'll know how the 2 boys go round all their old mates, the oldest swingers in town, and mutter the stirring words, we're getting the band back together. Behold, the Lord be with you. It's time to stop yawning, stop crying, stop worrying about being embarrassed, and get up on your feet. Celebrate and wave your arms high, for here is a new king, a new presence, a new covenant, a new friendship, a new creation. God is coming home to us and bringing us home to him.